What's up guys, Harbaugh Football Talk here. The 2024 NFL season is just around the corner, and while there are always some surprises, we kinda know who the true contenders are and many of the players who will dictate conversations. So what I wanted to do today is bring up and discuss a few names that maybe we don't fully understand who they are or how big a factor they may be, but have the potential to define the season or the landscape of the league as a whole. You're not going to hear me talk about Patrick Mahomes or Christian McCaffrey, and I originally phrased this as most pivotal situations, which would have included a pair of star players like Davante Adams, Max Crosby. What might happen if the Raiders are so bad that trade discussions will come into play? Instead, however, I want to look at players and coaches who rarely get mentioned on TV, aren't fully proven, or at least are in a new place/role. I'll explain the current setup, why I believe they could be critical factors for this upcoming season, and how I think they could manifest itself. Just quickly before we get into it, let me ask you to please consider clicking that like button if you enjoy the discussions, and maybe subscribing for more of these. I just released my annual Fantasy Diamonds video, and you can check out all my written content at hellosforfootballtalk.com. Link is down below in the description. But now, let's kick things off with Arizona Cardinals offensive coordinator Drew Petzing, who for many casual fans became the OC in Arizona last year, along with Jonathan Gannon getting his chance to be a head coach. It's understandable if you're one of those people who haven't really heard of him, considering he came into the league as an intern a decade ago, and has since been an assistant and position coach, changing plays and roles regularly. And it's not like the Cardinals were an offensive juggernaut by any means in his debut campaign in Arizona, finishing bottom 10 in scoring. Having said that, for geeks like me who go back to the tape and really look at what they were doing schematically, watching the way they approached game plans and the idea Petzing was willing to tap into was really interesting. I've referenced this before when I was asking burning questions for each NFC team in a video a couple of months ago, and was wondering what this coaching staff might be able to do now that they have more talent among the player personnel, combined with the somewhat unorthodox deployment of the X's and O's. As you go through his path in the NFL, Petzing's biggest influence has to be Kevin Stefanski, who evolved from Minnesota to Cleveland a few years ago, where he ended up coaching the tight ends and quarterbacks. What he hasn't been part of is the Browns' previous transformation into more of a shotgun-centric approach, spread of formations, and how they try to merge that with what Stefanski had been successful with. The contrast can be seen in the amount of under-center snaps for Arizona at just over 300, which is about twice as high as in any year of Kyler Murray's previous head coach Cliff Kingsbury. Arizona also finished top 10 in percentage of play action at just under a quarter of the snaps, and the usage of multi-tight end sets was pretty significant as well. That is something they could lean into even more now, and to illustrate that point with an anecdote from Yahoo Sports' Nate Tice, who was one of the very few people in this space to talk about Petzing on multiple occasions. When he visited training camp a few weeks ago, they were literally running plays in 7-on-7s out of 13 personnel, so 3 tight ends and 1 back on the field at the same time, along with just 1 wideout. That is pretty rare. I really liked what I saw in terms of the run game last season, where he used a heavy dose of duo, which would regularly hit between the guards with James Conner as a very patient and powerful runner, as well as GF or GT power and counter, where the backs like guard and tackle or an offside tight end pull across the formation with the rest of the O-line blocking down. That enabled the quarterback to actually hide the ball in play action, faking inside handoffs with crossover action, use actual bootlegs, but even more so half rolls, where he cut the field in half and gave Kyle a levels-based passing concept, along with the opportunity to create with his legs if he didn't like the look. In the dropback game, he used a lot of 3-man concepts to one side, where he put individual defenders in conflict, or created windows between how those guys would diverge. He did still run empty quite a bit, but he actually used motion with purpose on the snaps, and did a much better job of creating clean pictures for the quarterback with the route distributions. Plus, Petzing draws up a pretty diverse screen game, where he'd flip it to the tight end off split zone fakes or through tunnel screens from under center. So now projecting ahead to the 2024 season, the big addition of course is 4th overall pick Marvin Harrison Jr. out of Ohio State, who can now be that X-receiver isolated on the backside of the formation and creating more favorable looks to the field when opponents can't roll coverage that way. They picked up Florida State's Trey Benson in the middle of day 2 as someone who can add an explosive element and the potential as a downfield receiver out of the backfield. A traditional wide tight end in the top 100 in Tip Ryman from Illinois for those heavier sets that I've referenced. A bunch of young guys potentially taking another step, and of course a full offseason to work with a healthy Kyler Murray. I really like what I've seen from Petzing so far, and believe this could be a sneaky good offense, with a guy taking snaps who has played MVP level football in the past, despite far less help structurally I'd argue. Next up we stay on offense, but actually talk about a quarterback here, and that is Sam Darnold, now the Minnesota Vikings. this is a play I was considering taking back off the list because first round rookie JJ McCarthy had a pretty impressive showing in week 1 of the preseason for them, and I already saw a path where Darnold doesn't get a legit chance to prove himself in a new spot before he gets replaced again. Yet, now that he was forced to undergo knee surgery and is expected to miss the entirety of 2024, the veteran remains the designated starter as he has been basically throughout the offseason program. And damn it, I wish JJ McCarthy all the best for his career. Vikings fans deserve better in terms of injury luck to the quarterbacks, but us Darnold truthers deserve this opportunity to watch that guy in the real offense finally. Now, you may see that he did get 3 full seasons with the Jets as a starter, even if he was dealing with a foot sprain, shoulder injuries, and freaking mono those respective seasons. But let's also consider that Adam Gase was his head coach and play caller all 3 years in New York, then Robbie Anderson and Jamison Crowder were easily the best receivers catching passes from Darnold over that stretch. With a new regime coming in, the former third overall pick was traded to Carolina after that, where he started all but 1 of 12 games, missing a month after getting knocked out behind a pro line. In fact, through 4 seasons as a pro, he had been pressured on over 27% of dropbacks on average. The Panthers made a switch at offensive coordinator following that season and traded for the stressed Baker Mayfield as the former number 1 overall pick from the same draft, who got the nod but was ultimately let go, opening up a 6-game window for Darnold, in which he went 4-2 and actually looked pretty damn good in an offense that utilized his strengths, being involved in the run-heavy approach and pushing the ball down the field of play action. Still, with Sam's contract running out and new coaching staff once again coming in, and owner Dave Tepper insisting on trading up to number 1 overall for Bryce Young, the veteran moved on to San Francisco to work under one of the great offensive minds of this generation, Kyle Shanahan, even if he initially would probably be third on the depth chart behind Brock Purdy and Trey Lance. We saw some impressive flashes in preseason, and him actually moving ahead of Lance in the pecking order, allowing the Niners to actually trade away the guy they originally gave up 3 first-rounders for in Lance. And then there were a few days in the middle of the season where it seemed like Purdy wouldn't clear concussion protocol in time for the next game, but he ultimately did, and we only got to see Darnold in a meaningless Week 18 contest for both sides with the Rams. Nevertheless, even if you believe the former USC standout has been given enough chances, and what he's shown us isn't NFL starting caliber, you can't deny the skill set that made him a high draft pick. The big arm, the toughness inside the pocket, the ability to improvise and deliver from awkward platforms, and also his slipperiness as a runner himself. And like it or not, he'll be out there proving either side of the argument right finally, with one of the best young offensive play calls in Kevin O'Connell, 2 bookend tackles, a backfield duo of Aaron Jones now and Ty Chandler, and a receiving corps that consists of the league's high-speed wideout in Justin Jefferson, last year's first-round pick Jordan Addison, and a guy tight ends in T.J. Hawkinson, who nearly reached 1,000 yards through the air each of the past 2 seasons. As well as Kirk Cousins executed that Vikes offense over the last couple of years, and he clearly has an advantage in terms of seeing the field and making the right decisions over Sam. It allows O'Connell to go back to his roots more with the outside zone run game, and then bootlegs off that, which simplifies reads on the quarterback, as he can just work high to low to one side of the field. If the interior line is good enough to make that approach really work remains a question, but if they can give him enough time to hang back there, those deep concepts where he puts safeties in conflict, and having Jefferson as backside digs, where he's better than anybody else in the league, should match very well with Sam. I'm super excited to see the symbiosis, and even if I'm wrong about Darnold being someone who can be a starting quarterback in this league, I'm not saying a legit franchise guy. At least that debate should finally be settled. I just temper expectations based on starting the season with 5 playoff squads from last year, along with the 2 New York teams over the first 7 weeks. Let's talk about a head coach actually, and that is Mike Macdonald, now of the Seattle Seahawks. Based on what we've seen already in terms of hiring defensive coaches, and what we project a lot of units to look like this upcoming season, I think it's hard to deny that any person is having a bigger impact on the defensive landscape of the NFL right now than Mike Mack. Considering he was hired as the successor to Pete Carroll in Seattle, the Ravens elevated former Pro Bowl linebacker Chris Orr within the organization as McDonald's replacement, while the Dolphins hired Anthony Weaver, and the Titans Denard Wilson as assistants from the staff. Plus, even Jesse Minter coming along with head coach Jim Harbaugh to the Chargers, as the guy who took over DC duties at Michigan, where McDonald was previously. The impact this guy is having in terms of people in charge around the league is undeniable already. Now it's about what he can bring to his Hawks culture, which took a definitive step backwards this past season. First and foremost, trying to encapsulate the biggest influence McDonald and Mint have had on what has become the NFL's hottest system this offseason. They didn't invent this defensive scheme by any means. The roots actually go back to Rex Ryan as a defensive coordinator in Baltimore, and then the head coach of the Jets, which goes back even further to Macdonald, who Rex ultimately replaced, and stretches its branches across the football world, but ultimately comes down to a lot of the people who got hired by its offsprings reconnecting. I know Brett Coleman has been working on an insanely detailed video to connect all those dots and explain what the system comes down to for quite a while now, so whenever that comes out, definitely check it out, along with all the other great stuff that he, DJ Snyder, put out on the Bootleg Football channel if you're interested. But for now, what do you need to know? With all the different blitz combinations and pressure packages, as well as the coverage variations have been installed and run at a high level before, making it a nightmare for opposing quarterbacks and offensive staff to prepare for, the bulk of play calls and slot alternations was massive and not easy to install, much less get all 11 guys on defense on the same page. So what Macdonald and Minter did was streamline and simplify the language of the system, which now makes it easier to teach and combine passers with the coverage, without needing hundreds of different terms that everybody needs to click on straight away. Instead, you can run every type of pressure or sim pressure with every type of coverage, and the best thing is that all guys in the front 6 or 7 practice rushing from all these different alignments, which provides even more flexibility. Now, what the hell does all of that have to do with Seattle? While they have a lot of the pieces to actually make the system work at a high level, Rick Woolen came in at physical boundary corner, Alamo and Humphrey, Devin Witherspoon came in at blitzing threats and unafraid apex defender out of the slots like an Alpha Mollett or although smaller Kyle Hamilton. They brought in some versatile free agent safeties to change the picture on quarterbacks post-snap. They have a deep D-line rotation with first-round pick Byron Murphy II, kind of the disruptive effect that we saw from Justin Madubuike. This defense could suddenly go from bottom 5 in both EP per play and DVOA to flirting with the top 10. You combine that with an offense that features what might be the best trio of wide receivers in the league, a dynamic running back in Kenneth Walker, both starting tackles hopefully healthy again, and Geno Smith being unapologetic to air the pullouts on new offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, who just took the college football world by storm with a similar set of players and the deadly vertical pass at Washington. This team has the potential to be a headache to deal with. Yet not only are the Seahawks sort of a wildcard in a strong NFC West and among the wildcard contenders for the conference, which looks a lot more interesting than it may have done for stretches last season, but also as we project forward, if this branch may be the next hot thing for the league as we get around to next year's hiring cycle. Think back to the so-called Fangio system a couple of years ago, even if that was always oversimplifying things, or the fingerprint Sean McVay has had from an offensive perspective, and people has ever been connected with. The cool thing is that we'll actually see McVay and Macdonald go head to head twice a year now for the foreseeable future. We stick on defense, but look at a pair of players here, and those are Dolphins rookie edge rushers Job Robinson and Mohamed Kamara. If you just go through projected depth charts and see the duo of Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb in first string for Miami, you may ask why I bring up a couple of rookie edge defenders. However, considering Phillips tore his Achilles in week 15 and Chubb tore his ACL 2 weeks later, we have to wonder if/when they'll be available and how effective they may be by the time the Dolphins kick off against the Jaguars. The timing obviously was very unfortunate, especially considering both players I just mentioned were having the best years of their respective careers, and Andrew Van Ginkel became a free agent this offseason, what he weren't able to pay up for, considering they already knew they wanted to extend both Tua Tagovailoa and Tyreek Hill on offense. Those three guys combined for 150 pressures on just under 1,000 total pass rush snaps, 26 tackles for loss, and they were involved in a bunch of takeaways. Added to that, Shaq Barrett, who signed to a 1-year $7 million deal back in March, decided to retire at the end of July. So now all of a sudden, you may be looking at starting Calais Campbell as a jumbo at the end, similar to how he was used in Atlanta last year, but otherwise in terms of true edge rushers, Emmanuel Ogbah is the only guy on the roster with extensive success at the pro level. So in retrospect, targeting that position group in the first round with a high upside pick rather than investing more in the O-line, and then adding another piece in the 5th round with a strong collegiate track record at least, looks a lot better. Let's talk about both these draft selections. Job Robinson was a divisive name in the pre-draft process because his upside is enormous, but his production never quite matched up, finishing half a sack short of double digits over the last 2 years combined as a starter at Penn State. His first step was as good as any rusher in his class, being able to win with a straight speed rush and ghost moves, along with the dip and rip or up and unders to take advantage of his Cadillac quicks, being forceful with his hands to dictate terms, and converting that speed to power, as well as sticking his upper and lower half, are things he's definitely still working on, and he's slightly undersized in terms of setting the edge in the run game, although I appreciate his grit, leverage, and level of activity in that regard. Kamara isn't the most disciplined or cognizant at countering blocking schemes in that regard, but there's a reason he just finished 4th among all FBS defenders with 64 pressures last season. He regularly came up big in Colorado State's most pivotal contests as someone who's actually really good at angling his rushes, getting his hips turned towards the quarterback, and creating advantageous positions for himself as he counters the tackles outside hand and gets to that spot of the passer. That 3rd and 4th step up the arc isn't going to wow you, and the lack of length is what made him fall in the draft, but I see a path for this guy to be a legit piece of a rush package long term in this league. Obviously, how quickly Miami's 2 starters on the edge can get back to their usual selves will be usually determining how much and the level of play they'll need from the rookies. Kamara is actually the one more ready to contribute on 3rd downs early on, I think, but of course draft capital will be taken into account. And I do want to bring up Quentin Bell's name, a former wide receiver who transitioned to defense his final year at Prairie View and has worked hard the last 5 years to find his footing in the NFL, which it sounds like the Finns are pretty high on him being a real contributor. Either way, for a team that wants to get into marathons with their opponents, forcing them to keep up with their own high-scoring offense, guys who can take advantage of those positive game scripts, create big plays, and close out games will be critical. Some of that will be helped by the arrival of new defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver coming over from Baltimore, and a versatile pressure-happy scheme, which doesn't require more traditional guys to get home, but this could still be a situation that determines how Miami starts the season, and depending on those guys' developments, how far they can ultimately go. Let's talk about another head coach, and one that I'm sure you're all familiar with, and that is Jim Harbaugh, now in the LA Chargers. This clearly is the biggest name on this list, since Harbaugh has been one of the key figures in college football the last several years, finally bringing Michigan another national title this past season, before taking on another opportunity to coach in the NFL. And even before that, he obviously built up Stanford into more of a respectable program as well, prior to instantly turning the 49ers into an NFC contender, coming just short of beating his brother John in Super Bowl 47. So in no way am I saying this is an unknown in the football world, but it's quietly been a decade since this guy last coached in the pros, and he's taken over an organization that has consistently performed below its level of talent and expectations. So his effect on the Bolts, who have struggled to fill the stadium for home games, despite having a franchise quarterback, and clearly benefiting from the Harbaugh effect already in terms of name brand value, could be dominating headlines, whether they fly or crash. Harbaugh's fingerprints on the franchise are already easy to see. Joe Ortiz was hired as general manager at the end of January, but that was a couple of days after Jim was officially under contract, obviously on recommendation of his brother as a well-respected member of Baltimore's front office, who started his career there all the way back in 1998. And having said that, the head coach will still have final say in roster decision most likely, which came into play when they drafted a couple former Wolverines in late April, although there seems to be a match in terms of wanting to target players from big programs generally. They also moved on from starting wide receivers Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, while signed the Ravens running back duo of J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, while their biggest multi-year third-party addition was actually primarily a blocking tight end in former Seahawk Will Dissly. As I already mentioned, Jim brought along defensive coordinator Jesse Minter from Michigan, and he also reunited with Greg Roman, who he made that run to the Super Bowl with in San Francisco at offensive coordinator, before Rick Ryan brought him over to Buffalo for a couple of years. And then, surprise surprise, he came to John Harbaugh in Baltimore, where he orchestrated one of the elite run games in the league once again, before he officially resigned from his OC duties and took a year off, as the Ravens were ready to take the next step of Lamar Jackson as a passer. I already touched on what this defensive scheme could look like with a bunch of highly priced veterans now pressed into performing up to the contract figures, while having brought over Junior Colson as a Green Dot guy for the Wolverine defense and the Minter previously. Meanwhile, we understand how both Roman and Harbaugh want to win on offense, condensing the formation and pounding opponents on the ground, yet they also have Justin Herbert to take shots of play action with. So based on the formula, there's at least a path to give the Chiefs trouble as the big bad wolf in the AFC West, similar to how the Niners battled the Seahawks every year on the other side of the bracket when Harbaugh was there. The Broncos most likely are starting a rookie quarterback and still have some holes to fix in the roster. The Raiders are even less inspiring at the most important position, despite them having tied up in pricey veterans. If they sweep both of those teams and split with KC, suddenly they sit at 5-1 with a last-place schedule and the freaking NFC South at hand. You're telling me there's no way they can compete for a wildcard spot at least? I think there's absolutely a world in which all the ways this franchise has become a room filled with adults who keep the veterans accountable and relies on systems rather than individual talent, create a baseline for success in 2024 and beyond. So if Harbaugh's special stuff rubs off on the Chargers right away, what repercussions does it have on the rest of the AFC outlook? What does it mean for the two other divisional foes I mentioned with volatile leadership structures and potentially impatient ownership? Does a fringe team like the Browns or Jaguars maybe miss out on more of those playoff berths and suddenly tough decisions have to be made? Do the Chargers become an attractive landing spot for free agents next offseason if they're already ahead of schedule? Lots of implications that reach across the league altogether. Bringing us to another quarterback here, heading into his second season, and that is the Colts' Anthony Richardson. I've talked about AR-15 on several occasions this offseason, and even going back to my draft evaluation on last year, but I just believe he can be such a critical figure for the landscape of the AFC as part of a division that could suddenly be filled with top-end quarterback play. So while his name has been brought up a lot more than some of the others I've put on the list, in large part because of the potential he provides as a dual threat guy, especially in fantasy football circles, I do want to take this one more chance to talk about him myself. I'm not saying he may not come up when I put up my final season predictions and picks for all the major awards eventually next week. So first and foremost, let's just talk about what my evaluation of Richardson himself looked like coming out of Florida last year, and how that matched up with what we saw from him in about a month that we got from him as a rookie, before an injury to the thrown shoulder knocked him out for the rest of the year. I said all along that he was mislabeled as a raw project, rather than an inexperienced player who had already shown significant signs of growth. Obviously the arm talent is elite, the calibration still needs a little bit of work, just not being pinpointed in terms of throws to the short to intermediate area, but he can make those special throws without clean platforms, he can drill tight windows or put the ball in front of his receivers 50-60 yards down the field, he has an innate feel for the pocket and how to move within it. You see some eye manipulation in order to open up throwing lanes already, and then of course he's a 250-pound tank with 4.4 speed. We did see some of those inconsistencies with accuracy during his limited time on the field as a rookie, didn't show the greatest eye discipline, and while I don't think he necessarily launched himself into linebackers, he does need to protect himself a little bit better. Still, we did see some of those superstar flashes, where he's escaping sacks, launching the ball 40 yards down the sideline, whilst having Aaron Donald in his lap, sidearming throws and secondary reaction plays, and being unstoppable as a designated running option in the red zone. Now that guy is paired up with the NFL's 2021 rushing leader in Jonathan Taylor in the backfield, which could create the most dangerous option-based run game in the league. The Colts O-line improved massively over the course of last season, after having pretty significant initial problems at keeping Richardson upright. Texas wide receiver Adonai Mitchell fell to the second round, based on some character concern from unnamed sources. With pristine route running skills combined with a premier athletic profile, I outlined the Colts' second-year quarterback along with tight end Jelani Woods as breakout candidates for 2024, and could see the latter be a real matchup nightmare with his combination of size and athleticism. You can read up more on all of that at my site helloswithfootballtalk.com, by the way. There's just so much head coach Shane Steichen can do with his offense, and whether you look at how the Eagles fell off once he left following an MVP run-up season by Jalen Hurts, or the fact that he was able to keep this Colts offense as more than just a functional unit, which was a slightly better thrown ball by Gardner Minshew away from probably winning the AFC South against the Texans, he has proven himself as one of the better play callers in this league. And really all you're hearing out of Indy's camp when it surrounds Richardson is that we're not ready for what this guy's about to do to this league. Of course people within that building are going to hype up their guys, but I truly believe that this is a player who could have one of those Cam Newton-like seasons with 25 touchdowns through the air and another 10 on the ground. The defense was at least average despite some injuries, and added what I believe is one of the most pro-ready edge rushers that we've seen coming out of college in Latu. If this is a team that can score in the mid to high 20s, and the defense has the pass rush to close out games, I think Indy may not only surprise by beating out the Texans for the division crown, but be a real threat for the conference, which is loaded with high quarterbacks. We'll close this out with a couple of new coordinators, first with an offensive guy in Klint Kubiak, now of the New Orleans Saints. For anybody who's followed the NFL for the last couple of decades, the last name is probably familiar, since we're talking about the son of Gary Kubiak, who was quarterback John Elway's backup in Denver, and then long-time offensive coordinator and head coach at 4 different spots, most notably the Texans and then back to the Broncos, where he ended up winning a Super Bowl during Peyton Manning's farewell tour. Well, Klint is now getting a second chance at calling plays in the NFL, and has a lot more to prove than his dad. He started as an offensive quality control coach in 2010 for Texas A&M and then the Vikings, following a year at Kansas as the wide receiver coach, and called his nepotism if you like. Gary brought him back as an offensive assistant in Denver in 2016, although he did remain his position after Gary decided to step away from the game for a couple of years. Under Bill Musgrave now as the OC, who actually was first to bring a Kubiak from the college ranks anyway. When father returned as an offensive advisor and assistant head coach with the Vikings, the son followed and made a name for himself as the quarterback's coach and then the incumbent offensive coordinator for a year. After Mike Zimmer and his staff were fired in Minnesota following the 2021 season, Klint worked as a passing game coordinator under Nathaniel Hackett in Denver, and then Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco most recently, before the Saints decided to give him another shot at OC this season, replacing Pete Carmichael after 15 years in office. Excuse the extensive timeline, but I think it was necessary to go for this in order to outline Klint's offensive influences around the league. He grew up in what Mike Shanahan made one of the most successful, and then his son Kyle made the prevalent scheme around the NFL with the wide zone run game. Looking at what his father was most successful with as a play caller, being able to take pressure off the quarterback, with the boot game off that, heavily involved in the X receiver as a primary read of dropbacks, while maintaining a lot of the old West Coast principles, are key factors in this discussion. That's apart from his one season in Denver with his father, where even if the Kubiak-Shanahan influence was felt, the system revolved on Peyton Manning, the way he wanted to spread out defenses and control games at the line of scrimmage. Contrasting that to what we see from Carmichael throughout his extensive tenure in New Orleans, he was as much of an old school West Coast truther as you're going to find in the modern NFL. That was more than viable, with Brian Brees on the center, who saw the field at an elite level and was deadly accurate, but even once his physical skills started to deteriorate, that offense had to rely a lot more on Alvin Kamara, and with the genius of Sean Payton leaving 2 years ago, that unit steadily has gotten worse with subpar quarterback play. The Saints signed Derek Carr to a significant contract in free agency last year, but even then nothing about this offense felt easy in terms of how they moved the ball, with a lot of production coming in garbage time, even if the vertical passing game did show signs of life down the stretch especially. Now, I'm not going to act like Kubiak looked like a young wonderkind in Minnesota as a first-time play caller, as they ranked dead average that year with Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson and Dalvin Cook, remember the guy from 3 years ago, all available for most of the season. At least one of Nolans' tackles could be another catastrophe, we've reached the point where Kamara shouldn't be a dominant snap play out of the backfield probably, and Carr reverted to his painfully conservative self last year, regularly checking the ball down short of the line to gain third downs. But if Klint can take those decisions off the quarterback's plate, honestly at bootleg concepts, encourage more of a downfield passing attack with Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed and even second year man A.T. Perry, who I like quite a bit, there's a path for this offense to be better than average at least, which based on statistics they were last year, and now you combine it with a defense that we're still waiting to see age and the Dennis Allen, and this is a team that did quietly finish above 500 with some key injuries last year. I think if the Falcons stay healthy, they've just added too many pieces to not be the clear favorites for this division. But what if Kirk isn't healthy, and the Saints surprise some people by winning the NFC South and host a playoff game with the Rutgers home crowd? And then we maybe see a second team from the division compete for a wildcard spot at least. And finally, let's talk about Jeff Hafley, the new defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. So the Packers surprised a lot of people last season, with Jordan Love looking like the second coming of an earlier Aaron Rodgers for large stretches. The youngest group of pass catchers around the league quickly coming together, Matt LaFleur once again showing his individual brilliance as a play call and game manager from the sidelines, and finding enough big plays on defense to complement that. Clearly where they have the most room to grow is defensively, however, and based on the talent at hand, they should have been a much better unit for a while now. Many identified Joe Woods as a coordinator who held those pieces back in respect to individual usage and overall simplicity in terms of what they presented to opponents already last offseason. That's the one point you can criticize LaFleur on, keeping him around for a year too long, but they did finally move on from him now, and made somewhat of a surprise hire with Jeff Hafley, coming from Boston College, after spending the last 4 years there as head coach. What he'll do schematically exactly, and if he can maximize 5 first and second rounders each among the likely starting 11, will be huge for how much of a threat Green Bay can be to potentially represent the NFC in Super Bowl 59. While he's worked under Greg Schiano, Mike Patton and Jim O'Neill during his NFL tenures, when Hafley has been in charge as a co-defensive coordinator at Ohio State and then a head coach in Boston College, he's been tied to 4-down fronts. That's in contrast to Woods being a more traditional 3-4 truther on early downs, while being smacked at average in terms of the use of nickel personnel. From a coverage perspective, Hafley does have that influence with more quarters principles, and there's some connections with what is becoming a new meta across the NFL, with Mike Macdonald previously in Baltimore, and impacting the defensive landscape we see, in the way I described when I outlined him earlier. However, that's not what Hafley chose to do on the back end, at Boston College at least. This past season, they ran single high looks at a 70.5% rate, with a massive amount of cover 1 at 43%. That's directly tied to how they rush the passer. In terms of overall blitz rate, just over 32% at BC wasn't remarkably high for college standards, but looking at 6-man rushers in particular, better than 36% of those, when they did bring extra bodies, ranked 2nd in the country. Comparing that to what the Packers did in the woods, not only did Hafley choose to man up on the outside a lot more when they did put that one safety in the deep post, but it's also about what they did in defined dropback situations, as Green Bay used to have 2 high shell principles to either both sides at a much higher rate. Those numbers for Hafley are all based on facing ACC opponents, rather than what we'll have to work against in the NFL of course, but generally the principle he follows and could apply in Green Bay match up very well with the personnel he'll have at hand now. Up front, it should be much more based on a one-gap attacking philosophy, with Rashan Gary and the rest of the edge group being allowed to play with their hand in the dirt. Devontae White is someone outlined as a breakout candidate for 2024, considering how impressive the underlying numbers were for him last year already. They have the corners in Jaire Alexander and Eric Stokes to play isolated coverage on the perimeter, while they're bringing along plenty of rookies at safety who they'll need to figure out how exactly to deploy them. The big signing was Xavier McKinney, who can be that rangy, instinctive presence patrolling the middle of the field. And finally, they have 2 young linebackers with the closing burst to get home, almost cross-dog blitzes, or bail out to extended landmarks from mucked up looks. So we have to see how all of this ultimately plays out, but I think they have the talent to finish as a top 10 defense in the league if Hafley allows those guys to flourish, and that combined with an MVP candidate quarterback could be pretty damn scary. Now, here's 6 more names that I wanted to bring up, even though they're more well known for the most part. Deshaun Watson obviously has been nowhere close to what the Browns were hoping for to acquire from the Texans for 3 first-round picks plus, and handing him the most guaranteed money in NFL history despite the legal process he was involved in. Not coming off shoulder surgery, Cleveland had a top 2 defense by any measure you look at, and bring back all but one of the 11 starters. The O-line should be healthier, they added more receiving options, and especially with Nick Chubb coming off another massive knee injury, bringing in Ken Dorsey to help with the transition to operating primarily from the shotgun with more spread principles. This has to be the year he looks like a franchise QB again, and it'll determine if the Browns can truly compete with the best in the AFC. Kirk Cousins / Michael Penix Jr., the quarterbacks for Atlanta. Speaking of players coming off significant surgeries, Cousins tore his Achilles less than midway through this past season, and even as a pretty statuesque quarterback, we don't know if he has full confidence in stepping into throws, much less if he has to move around a bit, especially at the start of the season. Meanwhile, the Falcons shocked the NFL world when he backed up that free agency signing with drafting another quarterback in Michael Penix Jr. in the top 10, who just had one of the most prolific passing seasons in recent college football memory. He'll need to learn how to solve more complex defensive looks at the pro level. But what happens if he legitimately looks better in practice than Kirk? What if teammates and coaches start talking about it? Is there going to be internal turmoil? And what if the vet does get benched because he isn't quite himself? Does he lift his no-trade clause? And can he completely change the look for a team without a cemented starter, like the Raiders for example? All of this becomes even more interesting with Atlanta weirdly holding out the rookie after just one preseason game. Jameson Williams, the further wide receiver for Detroit. This one's pretty simple. Jamie and what he could be in 2024 has been one of the hottest topics amongst the fantasy community and in NFL discussions at large. Some of the Lions moved up for in the draft a couple of years ago, but hasn't quite shown the ability that made him the 12th overall selection coming out of Alabama, despite recovering from a torn ACL at that time. Missed almost his entire rookie season, and then the first month of this last year with a suspension for gambling. He did show signs down the stretch that he can deliver those spark plays, such as the 42-yard touchdown on an end around to open up the NFC Championship at San Francisco, but he's also shown inconsistency with drops and finishing catches through contact down the field. Can he be that vertical stretch and yak threat for a team with an elite play caller, operating through the running back duo and attacking the middle of the field? Then defensively, Hassan Reddick, the edge rusher. The Jets somewhat surprisingly traded a conditional third-round pick to Philadelphia for the star player back on April 4th. By no means did I feel like they needed to add another guy up front, but he was supposed to be the piece that puts that unit over the top after they finished 4th in pressure rate last season. However, at least at the time that I'm recording this, Reddick has requested to be traded out of New York already again, before even showing up for any of the offseason activities, based on wanting a big-time contract extension. The Jets claim that they've been open with him in these discussions all along, but if they don't manage to figure this out, they just lost a great situation on Rusher and Bryce Huff for nothing. And then who could Reddick still join? This is a guy who's racked up double-digit sacks and tackles for loss each of the past 4 seasons, with some game-changing strips to his name. If the Jets are fully intact, they have a good chance of being an elite defense, but at the same time, this guy could help another contender get over the top. Azeez Al-Shaair, the new Texans linebacker, coming over from the division rival Titans. I was surprised to see Houston move on from Blake Cashman this offseason, who was easily the most reliable linebacker, and complemented the aggressive but vulnerable presence of Christian Harris as a downhill player well. Instead, they decided to pay up for Alshire, hoping he can actually be an upgrade over that for DeMeco Ryans defense. He and Matt Burke turned that into a more than respectable unit, with a D-line that would just fire off the ball and more variety in the back end. I think with some new young personnel that they brought in the secondary, we could see another slight transformation back to more single high structures, but either way there'll be pressure on the second level to connect the front and back. They want these guys to play fast, but that reckless abandon needs to be paired with a guy in Alshire cleaning up the havoc they create. And finally, Joshua Williams of the Kansas City Chiefs, most likely replacing L'Jarius Sneed as a similarly big, long pressman outside corner. And no way I'm saying this guy heading into year 3 as a day 3 pick out of Fayetteville State is going to be close to that level of play, but looking at his numbers last season as a rotational player, under 45% completion rates and under 5 hits per target in coverage, he has a lot of the same qualities, being able to bother receivers at the line and having some impressive makeup burst if he does allow guys to get off contact. And if he can fill that same type of role will be critical in what we see from Chiefs defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo schematically, which was either bringing the heat with man on the perimeter or building out into two high looks in obvious passing situations as a changeup. Obviously they have an all-pro level guy in Trent McDuffie, Jamari Conner potentially being used more as a big nickel will be an interesting component, but in terms of true outside corners, Jalen Watson's the only guy on the roster with any legitimate experience in the pros. But that's gonna do it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help me by leaving a thumbs up, subscribing for future episodes if you haven't done so yet, and maybe browse through some of my other content. Last week I put out a video on some of my favorite targets in fantasy drafts, which was pretty successful in recent years. Before that I broke down Trevor Lawrence and his new contract. And of course you can find a bunch of my written pieces at hellosforfootballtalk.com, such as breakout candidates, my personal top 100 list and more. Link is down below in the description. Feel free to leave a comment on any of the names discussed today, or add one yourself who you believe could be a defining figure for the 2024 NFL season, but isn't talked about enough. If you watch this the day it comes out, we should be exactly 2 weeks away from the kickoff game between the Ravens and Chiefs. Until that point, I still have my full season preview out all on my site, all the major awards, playoff seedings, and the Super Bowl matchup. I'll have a social media post on some of my bowl predictions as well. To stay up to date with all of that, just head over to my Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can find all of that in the description as well. So until then, see you later. Peace!